Aji, are you starting the zikr or what?
I don't buy anything.
I think we should just start, Dr.
I think we can start now because it's almost 7:59.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ahmaduhu wa usalli ala rasulihil kareem khatamul anbiya wal mursaleen. Welcome back to the series on sacrifice and reformation in the context of the tragedy and the events in Karbala. This is our fifth night. We already have discussion on gender-related issues. We have discussion on reformation. We have discussion on the challenges that we face in the United States in terms of various issues. And we also have discussion on sacrifice. Today, we have with us one of the most eminent and distinguished scholar of Islam in the United States, Professor Inam al-Haq, who is a professor at Elmhurst University and College in Chicago, Illinois, who comes from a traditional Islamic background as well as the modern Islamic understanding of the issues that we are facing. He's well versed in Arabic language. He's well versed in the Quranic studies. He's well versed in Hadith literature, and he's very well versed in the history. Also, he's a popular khatib in Chicago, and he's a teacher in his own right on these kind of issues. His views, definitely, you must have heard when he was part of the Quranic series that we had during the month of Ramadan. So he would be focusing, on the issue today. Our topic tonight is racism in the context of the United States, and of course, from an Islamic perspective. Even though racism is said to be a construct of the late 18th and early 19th century, when people started talking about it and started writing about it, whether through the French anthropologist or the Harvard Professor Boyce, who earned the first PhD in sociology, and wrote about racism. Yet racism has been in existence ever since the recorded history. And different connotations and different terminologies and different names have been given, but this is what it is. Some very interesting studies about the origin of this word. Some people say that it has its origin in Arabic or in Hebrew. They say the word comes from ras, which is the head, or rosh, the Hebrew word. And basically means the origin of human being is the focus of this kind of thing. But needless to say that we have this discrimination, this prejudice, this biases based on one's origin of race, or one's origin of birth, or one's skin of color. All those phenomena have been there for the last several thousand years. We currently have two major theories that are dictating the discussions on racism. One is the scientific racism. By scientific racism, what is meant is that there is something in genes, human genes, that human being cannot control that thing. There's something that has been embedded in them by the nature or by God Almighty that makes them better than some people, better than others. So in other words, the skin of color is determined by the divine intervention, and that divine intervention includes hierarchies in terms of good or bad, in terms of superior or inferior. That is one thing that basically is associated with scientific racism. Then you have critical racism. That racism is not intentional. It is the outcome of a complex human societies, which basically deals with social factors and economic factors and many others. So hence we should not look at a construct that basically is inherent human being, or it is part of the human nature, or it is intentional. It is something that evolved over a period of time based on the interests of people. And then of course we have the long history of slavery, which was primarily initiated against people who were not of a particular race or a particular color. All those. So we have all those kind of issues, and in the United States, we see its manifestation quite significantly. We see that manifestation quite significantly in almost all aspects of life. There were studies in the United States done some 30 years ago, which said that blacks, by their origin, are less intelligent. Scientifically, they were trying to prove that kind of thing, even though those theories have been debunked. So we would definitely like to see how a divine faith that claims to be universal, Islam, has dealt with this issue of racism, the issue of other in every sense of the term, whether it is race, whether it is color, whether it is culture. And then we would also look at it in the context of the United States, then in what way the Muslims in the United States can play a role in creating a better understanding among people of different races, and giving a perspective that is more humane and more grounded in reality than a perspective that divides people and that creates conflict. I'll stop here, and then Dr. Walji will say a few words, and then Professor Inam will take it over.
Thank you, Dr. Aslam, and thank you for that introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen, Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Abul Qasim Muhammad. And welcome, Professor Haq, to this session, the conversation that we have, and we look forward to learning from you. As Dr. Aslam alluded, the subject of racism, there is a national conversation on racism in our country. And there is also the question of racism within Muslim Americans. And it seems that this conversation has never been fully unpacked as a national American Muslim conversations. Sure, it's been hinted at, it's been pointed to, generalized, and even headlined in articles here and there. But to be truthful, the issue has not been domestically unwrapped and laid bare so that it could be subject of a critical examination on the part of the Muslim community in America. And today, as the conversation about race, again, takes center stage in the national news feed of the US, with the tragedy of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis. The opportunity again presented itself for Muslim Americans to catch up with the rest of the country on the matters of race, racism, race relations within our faith and our practice. While American Muslims are an accepted part of American society, we are not the go-to community for moral leadership. Although the Quran gives us that description, when we are told, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ, that we have created you a nation most balanced, ummate wasata, so that you can be an example for the rest of mankind. Sadly, we are not the go-to moral community yet which is what we should be. And the way we tackle racism as an American Muslim community has a lot of bearing on us being accepted as a moral go-to community, which is what we should be aspiring to. The main deterrent that I see is sometimes our failure as a community to openly address the issue of racism within our ranks. You know, the immigrant Muslim community came, many achieved what is called the American dream, but what we have not thought about as a Muslim community, particularly the immigrant Muslim community, is the American nightmare lived by our Black and Latino brothers and sisters. You know, as sociologists say, that it is your zip code that will determine your destiny in America, and that is really so sad. But we have not quite understood or even tried to study the systemic racism inherent in our society. How many times have we considered the issue of structural racism and how this affects and interacts, you know, across institutions and communities? It is this very thing, the structural racism, that keeps Black people locked in dilapidated slum tenements, subject to daily prey of, you know, exploitative landlords, merchants, loan sharks, and so on and so forth. For example, in Birmingham, Alabama, 500 Black babies die each year because of the lack of proper food, shelter, medical facilities. Thousands more are destroyed, maimed physically, emotionally, and the litany goes on. One area that we really need to look at is the concept of white privilege, which also very much applies to us as immigrant Muslims who have come to this country. What is white privilege? That all white people benefit from white privilege, no matter what other advantages or disadvantages they may have in their lives. They're sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area that they could afford. You know, I don't have to educate my child to be aware of the systemic racism for their own daily physical protection, that I will feel welcomed and normal in the usual walks of public life, etc. White privilege does not mean that one's life has not been hard. It just means that one's skin color isn't one that is making living harder. And it is these challenges that, you know, we need to discuss, because American Muslims dealing with racism in our mosque, in our own communities, is that we cannot approach racism with a one-size-fits-all method or in a simple way. Racism in Muslim American lives, in the trappings of Islam under the cover of masajid, also happens to exist, sadly. And I will end on this note, that if America is an experiment, then Muslim America, with two distinctly civilizational trajectories, one Black and one indigenous, meaning the recent 50 years of less immigrants, is even more of an experiment. And it also is an opportunity that if these two segments come together, and these two segments are able to empower each other, we can create the most powerful Muslim community on this planet. There are many nuances, and I'm sure Professor Haq will be able to, you know, give us the Islamic perspective in terms of, you know, what is the legacy of the Blessed Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. Because we know that even before prayers were ordained or fasts were made wajib, the issue of equality of human beings was only second to the concept of Tawheed. And therein lies the priority that we have as Muslims living in America to address the racism in the way that we should. With that said, I would like to invite Dr. Haq to please address our session today. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulihil Kareem. Thank you very much, Brother Dr. Aslam Abdullah and Dr. Hassan Bolji, for an excellent introduction of the topic. Let me start with the notion that what is the nature of human self in spiritual and theological sense, because that is linked at a very deep level, that what constitutes a human being. And it is important to remember that, as we see in the story of creation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates human from a dead matter, but then he breathes his spirit in this module. ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ. And it is this divine spirit in his bodily form which creates the human being. And that is what makes human the most noble and most respectable creature of God. That the creation has to submit to him, prostrate before him, and there is nothing in the created order more high than the human person. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. We gave the children of Adam respect, dignity, and control over oceans and earth. That is because among God's creation, it is only human which has spiritual capacities. That it is not only that he can know the material world, but even the worlds which are metaphysical and unseen are potentially contained in human self, and man alone can attain the knowledge of God and the knowledge of unseen world. Therefore, the very nature of man in Islam is beyond any color or ethnic understanding of human self. And we see that among all the religions, in fact, Islam is virtually most colorblind and least racist community in historically and even today. From the early on, we see that the prophetic community which came into being, one thing which was absent from that community was racism. That, as Iqbal says, Hassan's Basra, Bilal's Habash, Suhaib's Rum, the Khak Makkah, Abu Jahali Chipula Jabist. That Hassan came from Persia, from Iraq that time. Bilal came from Africa, Ethiopia. Suhaib came from Roman territories. And Abu Jahl was local, but he was not considered part of the community. So in shaping this community, the key element was a person's faith and spirituality and his desire to morally and spiritually guide himself. And even we look at the history of Islam, while there are forms of discriminations which might have existed, even during the time of Prophet ﷺ, there were notion of nasab, and sometimes a tribe will glorify itself and pride itself on the ground or on the claim that they come from a very high ancestry, which Islam actually criticized and condemned. If there was one consciousness in Islam, historically, it was basically religious. That a Muslim will not look at himself vis-a-vis another ethnicity or a particular color, but in fact, he will always look himself against other religious communities. And if he had any consciousness of difference, it was actually more religious. If a person is black, it won't matter to a Muslim. If he is Persian or Greek, will not influence him. But if that person is Hindu, or even if he is Christian, he may feel a certain difference there. Because in formation of identity, religion and spirituality was supreme. And however, since Islam was a religion which invited humanity to its fold, if a person is not Muslim, she always had opportunity to become Muslim. While if a person is black, he has no opportunity to become white. If that becomes the basis of discrimination and difference, then the boundaries cannot really be crossed. And in fact, we do see that in the United States, racism is unfortunately linked with Christianity, that it is a white Christianity, and the idea of a European and white Christianity, which plays a role in formation of racist identity. So a white American will not feel any affinity and any closeness to a Christian who is living in Africa, in Somalia, or in Ghana, anywhere. While a Muslim, whether he is white Muslim in Syria or a brown Muslim in Pakistan, he will feel a certain affinity to a Muslim in Africa because of the religious connection which exists between two people. Therefore, as Dr. Aslam Abdullah mentioned, and this is, I think, very important point, that race is a kind of modern construct which evolved in Europe with the rise of modern nation state and the idea and the ideals of Renaissance and scientific advancement, which claimed that this is a kind of unique aspect of white race. It was believed that there is something genetic that white man is capable to unveil the mysteries of science and develop modern technologies and create powerful power structures and economies. And then the rest of the human society was actually placed on a lower ring of humanity because they are not, and they do not have the same capacity. So race actually became an identifying factor and a very, very important factor in the consciousness of Western men. So therefore, wherever they went, they in fact abused, and a lot of time they destroyed and annihilated other races because they were simply seen as subhuman and inferior, and they were never treated and seen as a human being. Therefore, the death of a Native American or an Indian in India was not the same as the death of a white person. And particularly in colonial setting, virtually there were no rights of subjugated people. An Indian in India will have no right, but if he moves to England, he will have some right because now he is in a white man's world, and the state law may offer him some protection, which it did not offer him in the occupied or subjugated territory. So race is, in that sense, a very inhuman aspect of humanity, because it necessarily makes you an intolerant person, and which makes integration also impossible. And one reason we see in the United States that Black and white communities always exist in their separate domains is that there is virtually no social integration of these two communities. They really do not mix at social level, as we see that in some, in many Muslim cultures, for example, you will see that how people of different ethnic groups, how easily they mix, how easily they marry among each other, and they do not develop this unique consciousness of race in those communities and societies. Now, as Brother Bolji mentioned, that where is the Islamic role in present American racial divide? And it is sad that we really did not play, and we are not playing the role of a model community which is above and beyond race in the society. And there is a variety of reasons for that. First and foremost, that we are actually a relatively young community. And in fact, it is in 1965 when Johnson changed the laws of immigration. The laws of immigration were purely ethnic before that. That immigration to United States was based on race. And there were people who were sent back from New York, Stony Island, because their physical features did not match what immigration had in their description that who will be allowed to enter this country. So it is in late 60s when these laws were changed, and then we have immigration, which became global, and Muslims came. But one of the things is that the Muslims who came to this country, first of all, they were themselves soldiers of a defeated army. They really did not have the confidence and self-respect and dignity of earlier Muslims. And they inherited many attitudes which were the result of long colonization, which they experienced, and in which racism was also inculcated in their personalities. So it is not only that they will not equally treat Black, but they consider themselves very inferior to a white man. This was actually their attitude. Plus, they were in a new land, and they were trying to figure out this new environment, the political and social forces at play in this society. And they remain focused on establishing themselves and availing the economic opportunity which new American society offered them. But however, I do feel that with the change of generation, those old attitudes are dying. And our children and our youth who is born and raised in this country, they are more conscious of these issues and these problems. And they are making a conscious effort to bridge the gap and to cross the frontiers. Here in Chicago, we have many organizations which have connected the communities, and they have brought better integration across ethnic and color lines. And we hope and pray that inshallah this attitude will continue to develop, and Muslim community will play a better role in terms of becoming a community which better integrates various segments of society and is truly a model ethical community. This is what our hope and our prayer is. So I stop here and let us open the floor for discussion and see what we all have to say and what our audience have to say.
Professor Anam, you very profoundly presented the divine perspective as contained in the Quran on the issue of human relationship in the context of what we call race and these kind of terminology. Let me pose a somewhat difficult scenario or what you call question. We believe that Islam, of course, is against racism and all those things. But in the writings of many Muslim scholars, and I would quote here Ibn Khaldun, who is describing the people of Africa and the blacks in a manner that perhaps no social scientist or no religious scholar could dare to present them at this time. In one of his writings, he says, beyond known people of West Africa to the south, there is no civilization in the proper sense. There are only humans who are closer to dumb animals than to rational beings. They live in thickets and caves and eat herbs and unprepared grain. They frequently eat each other. They cannot be considered human beings. Therefore, the black nations are, as a rule, submissive, black.
Dr. Aslam, you're not audible.
Stated. Now, one can definitely argue that maybe the translation into English from Arabic may not be accurate and all those kind of things, as many people have suggested that. But these are pretty strong words, and coming from those who basically studying religion and civilization in that context. So how should we deal with these kind of things? Because you would find, among Christianity also similar kind of thing, and in Judaism the same kind of people who would say these things. How would you react to this?
I mean, personally, I did not study it, but I can understand there is a difference here between creating a color-based identity and then believing that these people are unable to achieve anything because they happen to be black. Now, but it is not unusual that there are many societies in the world today who are at the lower level of civilization. Okay? It's just like there are a lot of people in the world who are deprived of education. And as such, they cannot have the knowledge and understanding and the discussion and which say I can have and we can have. So there is nothing wrong that when you are addressing that some people or some communities, they are not at the higher level of civilization. And you see that more in terms of our obligation to lift them and to raise them. That is different when race is created as an identity marker. And where you say, okay, only white people are capable to achieve this because this is genetic or this is divine plan, and other people cannot. That is racism. It is not racism if I talk about certain people that they are at the lower rung of civilization, because there are always people who are at the lower ladder of civilization, because human civilization is a continuous process of development and a process which is in the making. And some people are lower, some are higher, and those who are lower, tomorrow they may become higher. So if he is objectively looking at a certain community and commenting at the degree of lack or absence of civilization, that itself is not racist from my point of view. It is just like if I go to an American prison and I say I went to the American prison and what I saw there was a lot of black people. Okay? Now, that is not racism. That is not a racist statement. That is an objective statement that what I saw. Okay? Here, I'm not giving a moral judgment that they are rightfully there because they are black. No, I'm just giving an objective statement. This is what I saw. So similarly, as a sociologist, which Ibn Khaldun was, he can objectively look at many human societies and offer his analysis. But that will not make him racist, in my opinion.
Dr. Walji?
I think, thank you for, very profound and balanced statements, Dr. Haq, and we appreciate the clarity with which you have defined the entire issue. My question is that, as I said, that, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, until we address it. So how do we start doing a better job? Yes, we have the new generation which has come up and we see the changes. Give us some pointers in terms of, how do we acknowledge practically? Yes, we will mouth these platitudes that the humankind is one race, that the only race is human race, and that the Blessed Prophet, peace be upon him, was, advocating this from day one. And in fact, his last khutbah, his last sermon, actually included that message so as to ensure that people do not forget it. This is the ideal in Islam. But when we come together as a community, particularly that community that came here about 50 years ago, while it has had socioeconomic privilege, and they are in that rung, there is a vast Muslim community that has been left behind. So what practical steps can we take to be able to redress this balance and create a dynamic Muslim community which encompasses every color, every ethnicity as Muslims, as you say, because the religious identity is something that overrides every other identity?
I think that we are critical of Muslim community, but at the same time, we should keep in mind the limitations, which we have. For example, personally, I came from Pakistan, okay? And I came in 80s, 1983. Okay? Now, for me, just to understand American society and function in it was a long and painful process. It was not an easy process. Then these people, when they came here, one reason that they are economically prosperous is that they heavily focused on improving themselves economically. And I would say, unfortunately, this economic progress has come at the cost of playing less social role. Okay? Because instead of putting my time and effort and money into many social causes and involving myself in it, I solely devoted my life in making money. And that is what brought prosperity to me. Okay? So we really did not have a better understanding of American system, American politics, the role of capital and corporations, and we were intellectually not equipped. This is also very important because majority of the people who came, they were technically qualified and technically oriented. These were the people in medicine, in engineering, in IT, in these areas. We did not have people who were social scientists, people who were political scientists, who were sociologists, who were, criminologists. So even we did not have good scholars of Islam. So what happens, and still we see in our community, that it is kind of very lopsided progress, that the community may look pretty strong if you are judging them where they stand in American income bracket. But again, if you judge them, but what is their political influence, you will see it is not much. So the reason is that they were not well equipped in political skills. So the same thing is here, that we really did not have this broad, wholesome approach of formation of Muslim community and our role and our responsibility in that. We really did not have that. And that is what I'm saying, that is changing for better, as I see. Here in Chicago, we have an organization, Inner City Muslim Network, Iman. It is headed by a Palestinian who had a PhD from University of Chicago, and he has devoted his life to work in African American community. And he is so connected with immigrant community, Arab community, and South Asian community, that all these communities are now pulled together. If you go to their functions, their carnivals, all their activities, you don't see only black. You see a lot of Arabs there. You see a lot of Indo-Pakistani people there. And you will see that all these people are actually very generous to build this institution, which is doing an excellent job in uplifting these poor segment of society and also integrating all segments of Muslim community. The Council of Islamic Organization has also done some work in that. Currently, our leader there is also an African American who has been Muslim for a long time, and he is well connected with African American mosques, but also with South Asian and Arab mosques. And among young people, you do not see that hesitation, which we had. And as I said, that we brought some attitudes which were nurtured by colonialists. And those of us who watched a lot of American movies, okay, we have that image that where black is always presented as a petty criminal. So we inherited that image from American movies, and we brought that image with us to the United States. But if you look at the young generation, you will see that they do not have these negative stereotypes, and they do not have these ethnic barriers, and they connect more freely, more independently, and even at social level, even at matrimonial level, you will see that they easily cross the boundary and they integrate. So, in my opinion, the trend is in right direction. It's not in the wrong direction.
Do you still see these old pockets of racism within the Muslim community who are still resistant to the idea of a unified race-free Muslim community? Because when we look at the structures for the masajid, you would find that the African Americans have their own masajid and the immigrant communities have their own masajid. You would find that the congregants also, are divided on these sectarian lines or racial lines and all those things. And it's still, there are stereotypical images that are found in the narrations of the immigrant Muslims about the African Americans and others. Do you see that happening, or it's just something that happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s? And
I think it happened in 80s, basically 80s and 90s, but at the same time, it's continuing. And it is continuing because immigration is continuing. So what happens that an ethnic mosque is continuously reinforced by new immigrants who are coming from the same territory. So that is the one reason that we see that in many situations, the ethnic composition of mosque has not fundamentally changed in many mosques.
Yeah. One of the things Go ahead, please.
I mean, one more thing which is actually connected with the whole situation, that an immigrant who comes from a certain territory, see, I came from Pakistan, some people came from Palestine, here in Chicago. What is happening that he is looking for a home away from home. He really wants to be in a place where he can eat the same kind of food, he can dress the same kind of dress, And when he goes there, he actually meets people who are from the same area, and he shares the politics of that country, the culture of that country, the poetry of that country. So, and that is the main reason that mosque, in my opinion and in my experience, mosques really did not make an intentional strategy to be ethnic. I mean, I have been part of few mosques and I have seen them. I mean, it was nowhere intentional that we make this mosque and it will be only for Pakistanis. Nobody ever thought in that way. But unfortunately, this is what practically happened. And it happened because if I am the person who is trying to build that mosque, then every person whom I know is a Pakistani. Every donor I know, he is the Pakistani. Every person I want to put on the board, he is a Pakistani. And I'm really not making any conscious and intentional effort to go outside my circle and bring other people. This has practically happened. In fact, sometimes you see that the mosques which were initially mixed gradually became more ethnic. And it happened when their population grew. That if there was a very small community of Pakistanis and Arabs, they had one mosque. But now a lot of Arabs came, so they built their own mosque. You know, a lot of Pakistanis immigrated, so they don't, now they were big enough to create their own mosque. And that is because of the cultural affinity that it happened. And I would say that to the large extent, the mosques are yet not fully integrated. And they do maintain that ethnic distinction. But on the other hand, they have also come together in some kind of uniformity and some kind of collectivity, that where all ethnic mosques have joined hands and they have become part of one entity. And there are many things which they are doing together, in which all these mosques, Arab, Pakistanis, Black, Bosnian, all these mosques are actually interacting and getting involved. But if you look at the organizations which younger generation is forming, whether it's CARE or it's Iman, or we have Muslim Lawyers Association, we have Muslim Professional Association. If you look at these organizations, you will see that they are totally well integrated. So they are not ethnically oriented in terms of their membership, in terms of their leadership.
Well, I understand the point that intentionally the mosques were not designed to serve only one ethnic community, but it so happened that one ethnic community became dominant. But simultaneously, we should also acknowledge that you would not find in any masajid a systematic program to sensitize its congregants of race relationship and race sensitivities. So, for instance, if you join any secular kind of institution, they offer this kind of training which they call anti-racism initiative or anti-racism training and all those kind of things. We don't find these kind of sensitivity training even to the leaders of the Muslim community, even to the leaders of the organizations that we talk. I mean, I went through at least 130 websites of Muslim masajid and Muslim Islamic centers and Islamic organizations in the United States. And I didn't find anything that has to do with anything with race sensitivities, even though, 35% of the Muslim population happens to be African Americans. So what can we do? to become more sensitive to this
Mhm.
racial
Yes,
differences and divisions that
yes.
exist.
As I said, that unfortunately, uh, mosques are still maintained by the same people who immigrated about 40 years ago. You will see that the mosque leadership has not seen the kind of change which we see in some younger organizations. And therefore, their attitudes remain pretty much back home style. I mean, you worked on the issue of sexual harassment, you know, and now how many mosques really are sensitive to issue of sexual harassment? And they know what it is involved. And in America, legally, what you can say and what you cannot say, and what kind of problem you can get into if you are not very careful on these issues. So the same is issue of race here also, that they are not properly conscious of this challenge. And I think that there is really a need that there has to be some body independent of mosques, which should develop these ideas, these concepts, and they should help mosques to look into these issues. Something like, for example, ISFU has studied some aspect of mosques, and they have gone around and presented their findings in the mosques, that the nature of mosques, how they are governed, what are the problems, what is the degree of satisfaction of young, what is the degree of satisfaction of women. They have raised all these issues in their research findings, and they have been pretty open going around and talking to various mosques. So I think that the same thing can be done in all issues, including race issues, where mosques should be motivated to become more intentional in integrating minority communities, that they should make a conscious effort of that.
Dr. Walji?
I concur the evolution and the role of the mosques. And as you were speaking, I recall those days when I would speak to certain leaderships within the community, and our discussion was that it seems that our mosques are homesickness centers. I'd like to create a little bit of Hyderabad or Karachi or Delhi or whatever in the mosque that I have. And it's this, homesickness syndrome within the mosque obviously has, and it had a place, because you come to a new country, you need to have something to hook onto. So psychologically, it was something that was necessary. But now we say that we need to evolve from these homesickness centers into wellness centers where our young can flourish with new ideas and are able to do this. And the other point that I would like to add is that in terms of sensitivity, that sure, I mean, each one of us individually, collectively, and our Juma khutbahs, our lectures, our symposiums, our conventions, I think need to have a space where we actively say that we will examine our own biases, consider them from where they were originated, what messages did we receive as young people about people who are different from us, what was the racial and the ethnic makeup of the neighborhood that I grew up in, and now that I'm being transported in a different zip code. I think these are some of the key issues that need to be discussed by leadership, because it is these experiences, as you rightly said, that kind of produce or reinforce those bias or those stereotypes in our mind. And examining our own bias, I believe, can help us work towards creating a society where we are able to somehow adhere to the prophetic vision of that equality of all human beings. Because, he started this very early on. You will recall that when, Mughera comes to Hazrat Abu Talib and says, we will join the Prophet, but we have a couple of conditions. We'll come and talk to him. But we don't want Bilal and Ammar and others there. And some of the companions said, this is a great coup that we've got, Walid coming in and maybe he will join. So let us allow him some accommodation. And we know from the history that obviously that was not acceptable to the Prophet at all. And I think that is the vision. And it's unfortunate in some ways that 400 years of the social justice movement, the movement started, after slavery and all that, still could produce an episode and the tragedy like George Floyd's. 50 years after the passing of the Prophet could produce that tragedy of Karbala, because the prophetic message and those values, seem to be forgotten. It's an evolution. We are an evolving society. I believe that examining our own biases, individually and collectively, hopefully, can lead to that vision and that positivity that you exude. Dr. Haq, it's heartwarming to see, a formidable scholar, opining on this to say there is a way forward. There is a positive aspect that we can, and that we need to learn from what we did and that we're moving in. So I personally appreciate, your contribution from that dimension.
Professor Anamullah, let me ask a very pertinent, a straightforward question. Do you think that the Shias and Sunni leadership in the United States is ready to dialogue and to acknowledge each other's misunderstanding of the other?
Unfortunately, at the broader community level, it's not happening. I give you an example of Chicago, that we created a Shia-Sunni Unity Council a few years back, maybe 15 years now. And we held quite a few programs under that joint leadership. Some of the things we started actually is to celebrate Prophet's birthday, Eid Miladul Nabi, together. Now that creates another problem, that Eid Miladul Nabi is bid'ah, we shouldn't be celebrating it. But we started to do that. We started to have a remembrance of Imam Hussein in Muharram together, and highlighting the meaning of his sacrifice for Muslim Ummah together. We created a small group of learned people to discuss the issues which divide two communities. And where we, for example, a Sunni scholar will talk about the concept of Khilafah, and Shia scholar will talk about the concept of Imamah. Sunni will talk about the concept of Sahaba. Shia scholar will talk about Ahl Bayt and why they do not accept all Sahaba. Okay? And we thought that this way, a segment of community which is interested in knowledge can appreciate the position of the other and understand that the other is not baseless. They also have an argument in their favor. And at the larger scale, the community can together on the issues which are common to us. Now, we have another problem in the community. I mean, we have many problems, but one of the problems which we have in the community is that majority of our mosques, they bring their scholars either from back home or they are the product of sectarian schools here. And they are not the people who have received a broader education. It is one thing to have a holistic knowledge of Islam, and it is another that you are indoctrinated in a very narrow sectarian milieu. And unfortunately, we have majority of situations where the imams of the Muslim community, they have received more brainwashing than a broader holistic knowledge of deen. And that's a very big issue. And so practically what happened that from Muslim side, now again, the greater burden falls on Sunni Muslims because Chicago has about 200 Sunni mosques and has maybe 400 or 500 Shia mosques. And one Shia mosque, which is the largest mosque, they were very, very welcoming. And they always took the initiative. They always invited the whole community for different functions, served them delicious dinners, and they were very, very welcoming. But there was no proper response in the Sunni community for their gestures. And I personally approached many ulama who are in leadership in our community, and they totally refused to sit with Shia. And they just thought that there is absolutely no need to have any interaction with them. So that is another issue. In fact, majority of mosques accepted interfaith relations with Jews and Christians, but they did not accept intra-faith relations between Shia and Sunnis. And unfortunately, the political conflict in Syria and Iraq and Yemen, that has also been overshadowing this whole issue. That it played a role between two communities not to come close to each other.
But do we have any hope for the future?
On this issue, I don't have much hope. On this particular issue, I don't have much hope. It will remain limited to a small circle.
What do you think, Dr. Walji?
It's an uphill task. And sometimes it so happens that the minority tries as hard, but if the majority is not going to come closer, it becomes even harder. And the point made by Dr. Haq is absolutely correct. There are two issues that have always hampered this dialogue. One is the Middle Eastern politics overflowing into our communities. And the second, which is related to, clerics from both sides being trained within those seminaries with kind of the sectarian bias. So this is an issue. And Dr. Aslam, we talked about this yesterday and also on the first night, that perhaps within the Western academia and the scholars that are present, if we are able to create a thought leadership, a cadre of thought leadership or institutions, which can perhaps bring about policies and thoughts of this nature, then with the younger generation growing up much more open to something like this, we may have a chance. But given the present homesickness centers and the attitudes that we have that prevail, it is certainly going to be very difficult. But that does not mean, Dr. Aslam, that we do not try. And kudos to you and your efforts that you have always aspired to do this. And I appreciate the opportunity that you give us to be able to dialogue.
I think there is a third factor also that we should keep in mind, that there are agencies outside the Muslim community, outside the control of the Muslim community, that want to highlight the differences, that want to promote those kind of differences. And I would quickly refer here to a book written by an agent for all, Research Analysis Wing of India. It came out last year, and it said that we deliberately tried to promote this schism between Shias and Sunnis by employing the clerics of both sides to promote hatred against each other. And who knows? I mean, who is playing that game also? It's quite possible that there are some hidden. But again, I think the onus of responsibility lies upon us. That we should be vigilant enough to reject all those kind of things. And despite the fact that it is an uphill task, I think we should continue, because when we are talking of a universal Islam, and if that universal Islam cannot accommodate the differences of opinion within its own gamut, then certainly its claim of universality and universalism would have little meaning for the other ordinary people. And this is really the challenge that we have, that in what manner we both can look at our differences in a manner that can give us opportunity to work together despite having those kind of differences.
The Western societies went through these sectarian wars in 17th and 18th century between Catholics and Protestants. And 1/3 of European population was killed in those wars in 17th century. After that, they learned their lesson, that these differences cannot be resolved on this earth. And blood is really not an argument to prove your truth or the falsehood of the other. So then a movement developed which is called ecumenism, and they agreed that on fundamental beliefs, when a person agrees, then he will be treated as Christian. And they actually made very broad categories of belief that they could accommodate everybody. Along with the rise of secularism and a secular state which became neutral in matters of religion. Unfortunately, during this time, when Western societies produced ecumenism to bring various religious groups, Christian groups, under one umbrella of Christianity. At the same time, Muslims intensified their Shia-Sunni hatred and their claim to absolute truth and demonizing the other. So if today in the Western world, it is virtually impossible to create a conflict between Protestant and Catholic, in Muslim society, it is the easiest thing to do. And things actually have gone much worse. I mean, when I was growing up in Pakistan in 70s, we had no Shia-Sunni hatred. There was Shia-Sunni differences, always. Nobody wanted to kill a Shia. There were friendships, family relationships, lot of mixed marriages in urban areas. What changed all that was Iranian Revolution. Iranian Revolution threatened the whole Western world that Islamic political revolution can spread throughout. And to counter it, They put billions of dollars, and they have a great servant for their interest in the Muslim world, which is Saudi Arabia. And they flooded Pakistani market. I mean, I tell you that right here in Chicago, a few years now, it may be 7 years, 8 years ago, I gave a khutbah in downtown Islamic Center where actually a lot of key people come because of their job. So that mosque actually is a representative of many mosques on Friday. And I gave a sermon on Shia-Sunni unity and the problems and challenges. And then a person who had very long beard, he next Jummah gave me a very big packet. And he says, I brought this for you, you must look at it. And I said, sure. When I brought home, it had CDs, it had DVDs, it had books. All of them are focused on demonizing Shia. They are kafir, they are evil. There was a Jew, Abdullah bin Sabah, who created them. They are this, they are this. You know, you can have good relation with Christian, but you cannot have good relation with a Shia. Now, that material which he gave me, I think it was close to $70, $80 worth of material. So obviously there is somebody who is funding these packages, you know, and making sure that they reach to the imam, and especially to any imam who harbors any tendency of Shia-Sunni unity. So I actually, in the following Friday, doubled down and further criticized these attempts. But the problem is that a lot of time, the leadership, the boards in the mosques, it's not that they are against it, but they just don't want to take any controversy. And for this, they'll say, brother, don't get into that. Nobody asking you about it. This is not an issue here. See, nobody is killing Shia in Chicago. We have no problem here. So please don't even mention that. So they just, I mean, out of 1,000 people who are present in the Jummah, if there are 5 people who complain to them, they go after Imam, that please don't say anything which is controversial. And I think their tendency creates a situation where you really cannot say anything worthwhile, because anything which is worthwhile is controversial. That's a problem. Then I'm fortunate that I work in American university, so they cannot fire me. The only thing they can do is they tell me, please don't come. We don't need your Jummah. But they can't do anything more than that. But then an imam who is dependent on them for salary, it becomes impossible for him to take the position. And he will just see that if the president of the board is, you know, does not want that, that's good enough for him not to do it.
I think we have overran the time. It's almost
Yes.
9:18 and certainly 18 minutes over, but it was a very interesting discussion. Dr. Walji, please conclude it, and we will ask Professor Inam to make the dua and conclude tonight's session. And tell us also about tomorrow also, that who is the speaker and what is the topic.
You'll help me. You need to help me on that. I think there's been some schedule change, so perhaps.
Barkat Charania?
Yes. Okay. Yes. We're still on that. Very well.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haq. We truly enjoyed the conversation, and the fact that it's gone 18 minutes over is a testament in itself as to interesting conversation. I think our efforts in terms of, firstly, the Muslim community becoming more inclusive, be it within the marginalized community, the Black Muslim community, the Latino Muslim community, is an aspiration, and I believe that efforts, inshallah, will yield those results, if not in the short term, certainly in the long run. And I believe that effort needs to continue, and so does the conversation that was not exactly the subject, but sometimes we do a lot of interfaith work and not enough intrafaith work. And I think this particular discussion was very useful, that yes, it's an uphill task, but bringing the entire Muslim community together means, whether it's the Black community, the Latino community, the Shias, the Sunnis, and when you have many wider connotations of that, I do believe that we have a responsibility to do that. This series is trying to do exactly that, to do the list, as I said, Dawat al-Fikr, that at least what we are doing is creating that platform for some critical thinking, so we can come together and recognize where we need to go. So with that said, the announcement is that tomorrow we have another eminent scholar and personality in the Houston community and internationally, and that is Dr. Barkat Charania, who will introduce tomorrow, and he will be talking about the issue of poverty in America tomorrow. So inshallah, we will see you at the same time, 8 o'clock Pacific time, 10 o'clock Central time, 11 o'clock Eastern time. And with that, I will request Dr. Haq to end this session with a dua.
اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
والسلام عليكم.